Still a Casbah. Got to give it up. Got to give it up. That stuff. Got to give it up. Got to give it up. That stuff.
Hello. What a beautiful place. And what a beautiful spring day. I'm so glad to be able to share this early April day with you here in Westport. And I'm Paul Cavalcante, and you may know me from the radio here and there. We're gonna do radio without records, but I think the records are already in you to begin with, and that really is what I have to say to bring our special guest on, because he truly is someone who needs no introduction. He's gonna get one anyway, but it'll be very brief. Tony Visconti has touched music that has touched our lives. It's as simple as that. The music that he created with the artists that we'll talk about today, the inside track, the secrets, the tricks of the trade, maybe he'll drop a few, but all of those things have added up to a body of music that we've internalized. It's the soundtrack of our generation and our lives. So let's get to it and hear the real story. Please welcome Tony Visconti.
This man, Paul Cavalcante, is my idol. I was listening to him for like a couple of years, maybe 5 years on WQXR. I love classical music on a Sunday morning. And then I wrote him a fanboy letter. And that's how we got to know each
Which I never saw because I didn't read my stupid inbox for however many weeks or whatever. But we've connected since then, and to get to know you has been such a joy, really, because you're so open with your life. You know, your life experience is extraordinary. You contain multitudes, but you're still kind of that guy from Bay Ridge.
Well, we're similar in that sense. We talk about our growing up in our neighborhoods in New York City, and we have a similar background, and we ended up in music.
You know, it's funny, I don't know my way around the keyboard or the fretboard at all. I didn't ever feel when I was young that I was touched by music. I felt that I would be called to tell the story and somebody else does the performance. And I think that you at an early age had your musical awakening. I mean, when did you first start to really put your hands on the instruments and go, oh, I can figure this out?
I got a ukulele for Christmas when I was 5 years old.
Good prep from getting to know George Harrison downstream.
Yeah. So the book came with, it was a Popeye ukulele. It had decals of Popeye and olive oil on it. And the strings were all colored, like the G string was green, the C string was yellow, and all that. And they had came with a book of diagrams, so I couldn't read words, but I could easily see that this finger had to go on the red string, and this finger had to go on the yellow string, and all that. And by the end of the day, I was playing a couple of songs and singing along with it, 5 years old.
Wow.
So before that, I listened to my father, who used to sing in a barbershop quartet. And I learned that 4 people sing 4 different notes, which a lot of people don't know that until they're a lot older, you know.
You know, it's funny to talk about that kind of nuts and bolts aspect of music because, yeah, color coding, what an easy way to learn. Yeah, think about the individual notes as, give them names, and put them all together. With a name like Visconti, I'm thinking Visconti, Cavalcante, we're such noblemen, you know. The Viscount and the Horse Count.
That's true.
But you know, coming from this Italian or you know European background, music is really baked in, and whether you have the gift or not, it's going to play a role in your life. So you talked about your father being from or having participated in a barbershop quartet. Now your mom also had some musical ability. Tell us
Yes,
about that.
my mom's side is Neapolitan. Comes from my family comes from Naples through her, and her mother came to America in the early 1900s and all that. She wasn't a very well woman, and my mother had to take care of her. But my mother learned to sing Italian songs through her mother. And my earliest recollection of my mother singing was I was quite young, and she would make that Sunday pasta sauce, which would start on a Friday, or maybe even a Thursday. And she'd stir it, and and then she'd be singing in the kitchen. She would sing O Solo Mio and Oi Marie, quando sonda gebezza pute. You know, she'd sing like that. She had the most beautiful voice. And when she was older, I said, Mom, you know, with that voice, you could have been a professional. You could have sung, you know, somewhere professionally. And she says, no, all Italian women could sing.
Too modest. But that sense memory is powerful. You know, they say that the sense of smell, the sense of hearing, you know, all of them do different things in terms of wiring our brain. So, not that you have synesthesia or anything, but do you associate those sensory experiences downstream in your music life? Did you ever get a Sunday sauce feeling from a musical experience in the studio?
You're on the money there. Absolutely, yeah. The sauce, the smell of it for like basically 4 days of the week, is being cooked, you know, and then the eating of it and get it on. You have to wear a white shirt when you eat sauce.
You're going to take a bath in this.
You have to get that stain. It's very important to get the stain.
So I like to saute a little chopped shallot. I don't use yellow onion, and I like to saute a crushed clove of garlic and then take it out so it doesn't burn. And after that onion has softened, that's when I'll put the canned tomatoes in. I gotta be whole plump tomatoes. And you can then put a splash of wine and you just let it reduce. And then when it's time to put the sausage and the meatballs in, I like to bake them.
Yeah.
Because that gets all the fat out.
Yeah.
And then you put it in and you let it sort of rehydrate and take in all the goodness of the tomato sauce, and that's the simmering process. That's my Sunday sauce.
Yeah, that's my mother. Probably we did it a similar way. I use a garlic crusher. You know, I put it in there and squeeze it, and the garlic comes shooting out like a zit. You know, and you know this, don't you? And but she crushed it by hand. She's a powerful woman. I forget where I was going with this.
You didn't think you were going to come away with recipes today, but...
Her secret weapon.
Okay, here it comes. That's why I brought this up in the first place.
A couple of tablespoons full of sugar.
Yeah.
Because she said it gets rid of the acidity in the tomato. And a lot of, you know, die-hard Italians would say that's a no-no.
It's true, and the alternative to that is a carrot.
Oh.
And I've even chopped carrot and celery and started with that and then continued on with the sauce. And I've been chided, that's not really Italian. But what really is Italian?
Yeah. Well, when Italian food came to America, they Americanized it. In Naples, you couldn't get meatballs. It's an American invention. I mean, maybe the richest people could afford one meatball a week, but it was those days were, you know, horrible. There was a lot of poverty in southern Italy, not in northern Italy, but in southern Italy. So a lot of Italians who migrated had meat for the first time when they came to New York.
So Tony and I have dinner from time to time. This is like 98% what we talk about. But it's a good precursor to where this story is going to go now, because this home life, these humble beginnings, and embracing the fact that you come from poverty, that your people came here to build something greater, the adventurer is already in you. Everybody's got a little, for better not worse, Christopher Columbus baked in, you know. So for you, the adventure is going to pull you across the ocean and you're going to go to England. But before you get there, there's more hard wiring that has to happen. There are more sense associations. And we talked about the senses of taste and smell here. But now, auditory comes into the picture, and you come from a world of reverberant sounds in tiled hallways and the sounds outside of your home in the streets of Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, and all of that 1950s world with its sort of reverberant, tacky sound. I keep on emphasizing this because years later, as a record producer, you're putting that in like the couple of spoons of sugar that you're not supposed to put in the tomato sauce.
Oh, yeah, well, I always put a few spoons full of sugar in my productions, for sure. It was a great time to grow up in that period. So I'm living with an Italian-American family. I'm hearing the language spoken a lot, but also across the street we had Jewish friends, so I'm hearing Yiddish a lot. And up the road we had Hispanic friends, so I'm hearing Spanish a lot. This is fantastic thing to be brought up in Brooklyn, to be exposed to so many cultures at the same time, simultaneously. And when you're a kid, you don't even know it's different cultures. You're just learning all these words, you know. And, you know, I'd know meatball and gefilte fish, not knowing that they belong to different groups yet, you know. So it was just fantastic. And then when radio started, at age 11, this guy called Alan Freed was on 1 day a week, 1 hour a week, in fact. And that's when we finally heard music for kids. Because before that, music was just grown-ups, you know, Vic Damone, Tony Bennett, Frank Sinatra, and all that. But finally, we're hearing these people called like Bo Diddley, Chuck Berry, Mickey and Sylvia. These are all like around that area, New York area. Buddy Holly, you know. And this is our music. For the first time, I think my generation is the first generation that had music made for them. And so...
And in person, you got to hear a lot of and that's why I mentioned tiled hallways and so on. You got to hear a lot of music sort of in situ, you know, in the field, actually happening around you.
Yeah, well, when I sang, some of my friends and I would sing together on street corners. We'd do doo-wop. And that really did take place. That's not just in movies. It was the best. You know, we had to do it somewhere, like under a light, because it was in the evening, and there would be, you know, bugs flying around, and we'd be singing like, "Where are you, little star?" Those, you know, those old doo-wop songs.
He has a nice voice.
And I tried. And then we'd go in our school, on the school breaks, we'd go in the hallways where the reverb was fantastic. So we'd get in the, you know, open the door, and instead of going down the stairs, we just go in, move in a bit, and start singing doo-wop in the stairwells. And it was just, you know, there's your reverb. Because I didn't know, the thing that I liked about records, which I was completely envious of, and which I thought was magic, was where is this echo coming from? You know, because it doesn't exist everywhere, but it's on records. Where's the echo? What is it? And that was...
And the radio had it too, so when you heard Alan Freed or Jocko Henderson, they sounded like they were in a room like this, and they did that purposely. They wanted the theatricality of the sound to match what was in the recordings.
Yeah, so that was that magic I was looking for, and that was the single most reason why I wanted to start learning how to make records. I wanted to know how you get that frickin' echo. You know, it's so important to me. And then the slapback thing, that was like psychedelic, you know, like Elvis's song, hey, hey, ho, you know, that slap that came, you know. That was a tape trick. I didn't know that.
Well, many miles down the road of your experience, there are these elements that we're going to hear in David Bowie and T-Rex records for sure, and we'll taste test some of those audio samples as we go along, but I don't want to leave the early days just yet, because we're really building a portfolio, Tony, of how your ordinary life experience is something that you've been able to take with you into the professional world, and so you've learned by osmosis, you've soaked in the rich world. And you know, Dion was up in where I grew up in the Belmont area of the Bronx and Arthur Avenue and that Italian-American community. He was hanging out in the hallways of his building. You were doing it in Bay Ridge, having that experience. And all of these people were primed to have this moment of stepping to the next level. And for you, that would involve pairing with someone to be a music partner and maybe taking your act out of, you know, the safety of home. You set sail at a relatively early age and with a very ambitious plan.
I did, yeah. I started out at 13. I finally got into a band. We were a trio, Mike D and the Dukes. there was Mike D, and I was one of two dukes. And it was
Not the thin white dude, not yet.
it was guitar and vocals. That was me. Mike D played the saxophone, and his cousin, who's a blind guy, he played drums. So we had a blind drummer and Mike on the sax, and his father was a butcher, so we always had nice roast beef sandwiches at the gigs, you know. And it was fantastic. And some of those, so we originally, my first gig was an Italian wedding. What else, of course, you know. I didn't know Hava Nagila yet, so we were playing Italian weddings for a start. And we made $10. The guy, the father of the bride came up to us after the wedding, gave us a $10 bill, and he says, "Go ahead, kids, split it 3 ways." Work out the math, you can't. So that was the first gig, and I said, "Wow, you get paid for playing music?" I said, well, I like this idea, because that's what I'm gonna do for the rest of my life, and I might as well get paid for it. So after that, I did a number of club dates, and they were very lucrative. I could work on any weekend and do 2 weddings, and I'd make more money than my father did for the whole week. And then on one of those weddings, I was working without a union card. I was just a kid, and I was about 15 at the time or something, 15 to 16, and a union guy came down. He goes, "Let me see your union card, kid." I said, "I don't have a union card." He goes, "Well, you can't do this room. This is a union room and all that." Because I tell you what, you come down to the local 802 Monday morning, I'll get you all signed up. And I said, "Yeah." So since then, I've been a union carrying, you know, musician's union card.
And I guess psychologically that made you feel validated and that you could take it to the next level?
Yes, absolutely, because through that I met other, you know, there was a thing called the union floor. I don't know if any musicians are here and remember that, but at Roseland Ballroom was the union floor. The union offices, which is, you know, like little offices upstairs, but on that union floor you had a guy with a microphone, and you had about 150 musicians looking for a weekend gig. So the guy would say, "I need an accordion player, Massapequa. Who can go to Massapequa? Accordion." And so guy, "I'm an accordion player," you know, maybe 15 accordion players would run up to him. But I got gigs that way, and so did these other guys. And I met these guys too. The important thing was they didn't do just weddings. Half of them were jazz musicians. And I got to work with some of the best musicians who later led me to working all summer in the Catskill Mountains, where all those Catskill Mountain bands were really top-notch jazz musicians who couldn't get work in the summer. That was the only thing was that summer job. You know, in the other seasons, you just do studio work. But New York used to just close down in the summer, and that's where you continue to work.
It's so wonderful that the Hudson Valley has been reborn in the way that it has for a different generation. Our parents' generation ran to the Catskills, and they were the resorts that were very much, you know, it was a sort of an ethnically grouped areas, Italian Catskills, Irish Catskills, German Catskills, right, and certainly Jewish Catskills, and so on. So tell us about, you know, what a summer gig would have been like in that environment. I'm picturing the cars with the fins, and I'm picturing the people getting dressed up at night to go into the little nightclub of the resort where they were, you know, staying and have that kind of experience. And was that the setting where you were playing? Well,
it was fabulous. It was a big hotel, and the rooms were really nice, and the guests stayed there and paid, you know, a good amount of money to stay there. The musicians and the kitchen people all shared these kind of bunkers where you slept. A lot of people slept in one room, and you know, maybe 4 people per room. And it was really great. I didn't mind that because I made new friends that way, and it was really fantastic. So in the evenings, I started out my first year, I played with a quartet, and we were the lounge band. And by the way, I was underage. I shouldn't have been there until I was 18. I was about 16 and a half. So I played in the lounge band, and the leader of our band, his eye was on Las Vegas. So we were doing all these Louis Prima songs, like, and some of the Louis Prima songs were like Jewish songs. Italian and Jews share a kind of musical feeling for it.
Billy Joel has built a career on this.
Yeah. So we would do a song like, "You gotta have a little mazel. Mazel means good luck. Doo-doo, 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 doo-doo." Never heard that before, right?
Italian families can be very insular, and Italian-American parents very overprotective. It sounds like yours were very casual. Maybe the golden ticket for you was that union card, the idea that, oh, it's good for Tony to go away for the summer. He's okay, he's up working.
Yeah.
Was that kind of the vibe?
Yeah, they let me loose very, very early. You know, I was about 16 when I started going to the Catskills, and my parents were very much in love with each other. They wanted to get rid of me.
That's interesting.
I knew that. I knew I wasn't wanted any longer, and I went up to the Catskills. Of course, they were very proud of me and all that. And, you know, eventually, you know, my dad used to come home from work. He worked very hard, long day as a carpenter. He'd see me relaxed and watching Soupy Sales on television. And it didn't matter that I was working. He wanted me to work as hard as he was working. You know, that was his point, and he felt like my life was too easy. But I was already hell-bent on doing this, and I knew I was going to do this for the rest of my life. The Catskills we had this wonderful thing. We had a proper nightclub, and I was playing in the lounge band the first year. And in that year, this band leader spotted me, and he asked me to join his band when I came back to New York. And his band was the Ben Maxick's Town and Country Club in Brooklyn, where this Ben Maxick had an idea. He went to Vegas, and he says, I want to bring Vegas to Brooklyn. And the son of a gun did that. He built a 1,000-seater nightclub at the edge of Floyd Bennett Field.
Huh.
And it was right at the edge of Brooklyn.
Yeah, that's almost in the ocean.
Yeah, so I got that. So that autumn, I went there, and he already knew I played double bass. I learned double bass in high school. So I played double bass in this Ben Maxick's club. And when we had to do, the kids wanted to do a rock and roll song, I just got my Fender guitar out and did a Buddy Holly song or a Rock Around the Clock, or, you know, Bo Diddley song and all that. And the kids would get up and do the twist and all that. So I had such, I mean, that's something, that's a music education you can't get in a university. That's really learning the work in the field and what people like. You know, you get instant feedback. You play a song that stinks, they'll boo, you know. If you play a song they like, they'll dance, and they might even throw a $5 bill on the stage, you know.
You were well prepared, and you couldn't have known that there were these other souls out there in the world that would soon converge with your own, but you know, for all of us sitting and enjoying these recollections of Tony Visconti, downstream, think about Thin Lizzy dancing in the moonlight, for example. I'm just going to pick that as a random example. Everything that you just said is in that record. Every single one of these seminal experiences baked into you, prepared you for what you would have to summon on the fly, because that's your job. You're in a setting with these artists, and you got to pull stuff out of thin air and be the binding element that makes a magical record. So we're going to go to England in a moment, but before we leave New York, you mentioned Roseland, which doesn't exist anymore, and there were the Brooklyn movie palaces that were also, you know, cathedrals of music when they did their shows. So tell us about Brooklyn Paramount, Brooklyn Fox, whichever one it was in your time.
Well, Alan Freed was an amazing guy. I mean, he did some shady stuff that it's irrelevant to go into that. What he did was he brought music to the kids. And it was around Easter, when your school holidays were, Easter and Christmas, there'd be a rock and roll show at the Brooklyn Paramount. And it wasn't far from where I lived. I could take the subway from my house and go there. And I was about 11 or 12 when I first told my parents, I'm going to go to the Brooklyn Paramount, and they were like biting their nails, but they knew I knew the subway system. And I'd go there, and it was like 5 or 6 shows a day, and you'd have Buddy Holly, Bo Diddley, Chuck Berry, the doo-wop groups, Dion and the Belmonts would be, that was a little later, Dion and the Belmonts. And the show would be about an hour and a half, no movie, but it was normally a movie theater. And I would just go nuts. I would run up to the stage with all the other kids, you know, and watch my idols like as close as 15 feet away. And I had their records in my collection, and I'm seeing them. And after the show, I would run around backstage and get their autographs. And the funniest thing I ever saw after one such show was Little Richard was playing at the show. And behind the Brooklyn Paramount, he had parked a lavender Cadillac convertible, lavender. I don't know where real custom job, right? So he's in this convertible and he's sitting on top of the driver's seat, not in the driver's seat, on top of the driver's seat. He's wearing all lavender. He's wearing lavender boots, lavender shirt, lavender trousers, everything lavender. And I think eye makeup is lavender as well. And he's playing his radio, and we're just kids. We're just staring up at him like, we're this close to Little Richard. He's got like a bodyguard next to him, and with his toe, he flicks a switch on the dashboard, and his antenna goes up. This is 56, this is like an antenna that goes up on its own. It was like ooh, it's haunted, and then he's like looking around, yeah, we got it, you gave us a thrill there, Little Richard. Then he'd flick it down, and it would go down again. Maybe 2 minutes later, he'd do it again. Click, go up. And from there, I got a lot of autographs.
Where is this autograph book?
My mother threw it away.
Oh, everybody's mom. Stuff you leave in the attic is up for grabs.
She had this box she was saving with all my old stuff, and there was some musical there was some flutes in there and all that, and she gave it to the nuns. Which you do when you want to get rid of junk that your son accumulated, So anyway, that's where it went. But I got a Mickey and Sylvia. I love them. Love is Strange, that song Love is Strange, and he was my favorite guitarist. And I caught him running out, and I almost blocked him like a football player. I said, got to get your autograph. He goes, well, I got to eat. I haven't had breakfast. I said, please, just give me your autograph. So I brought the album sleeve, Mickey and Sylvia's first album, and he signed it. And I said, one more thing, can I have a guitar pick? He goes, sure, anything. I just got to eat breakfast. And he pulls out a guitar pick, and he hands me this guitar pick, which I had for years in my wallet.
Did you connect with Sylvia later on? Because you should know, Sylvia of Mickey and Sylvia would become a solo artist. She had a huge hit R&B song called Pillow Talk. And she also, ran a music business, a label, production, A&R.
Yeah.
She's capable of doing that. So did you connect with her downstream after you'd made it as a producer?
No, I didn't. I know who she was eventually, when she started her own company and all that, but I just saw her as one of the most beautiful women in the world. She was so beautiful, and her voice, their voices blended perfectly. And she was actually, I read recently that she was Mickey Baker's guitar student. And so she came on stage with a white Les Paul, and he played I think the black Les Paul. And they have a lot of photographs of the two of them playing the guitars, but she was basically a strummer. And they did a very clever thing, which when I was a kid I thought was an organ, but he put Sylvia's guitar through a Fender tremolo amp. And he just turned the tremolo on, so it would go, like that. And I always thought it was an organ on their records. Huh. They had no bass because I think somebody was actually pressing bass pedals from an organ. So they did a lot of cool stuff in the studio, which translated to beautiful music, but it took me years to find out what they actually did.
Well, meanwhile, a few thousand miles across the ocean, the Beatles were paying attention. Think of the song Drive My Car and how derivative it is of Love is Strange and some of the things that you're describing with Mickey and Sylvia.
Yeah, they were listening to American music. Living in Liverpool, they would buy the records from sailors.
The Brooklyn of England, Liverpool.
Yeah. But these British sailors would come back from America with loads of 45 RPM records. And
so Tony's story is going to pull him now across the Atlantic as well. You go to England, and this is where we really kick into high gear. But what was the dining room table conversation like? Mom, Dad, I'm going to England.
Exactly, and they said, good riddance. And, go ahead. I told you, they were the most romantic people I ever met, so I'm an only child, so they had,
I am an only child, too. They never let go. I was completely overprotected. Either you're overprotected or underprotected, or not underprotected, but set sail.
Well, they were overjoyed, and they said, just be careful, just be careful.
Whatever that means.
So I went there at the behest of this guy called Denny Cordell, who was a famous record producer. He produced Georgie Fame, and he produced the very famous record A Whiter Shade of Pale by Procol Harum.
Who connected you with him?
He was connected with my publishing company that I was signed to in New York, the Richmond organization. And I would go up there often and make demos in their demo studio, and then I was given the job as my boss, publisher said, he says, Tony, I got to tell you, I don't like your music. I said, all right, fired. You know, I'm saying, where do I walk now and get a new job? You know, he says, but I do like your demos. So that was his cue to tell me that I was going to be the house record producer. That's exactly what he said. I want you to be the house record producer, and I want you to make the demos with all of our writers here. So I was doing that for a good 6 months when Denny Cordell, who was with the sister company in the UK called Essex Music, he was there for a visit. And I just happened to go to the water cooler the same time as he did. We both shared a sip of water. And I said, hi. And he goes, hello. And I said, you're English. And he was indeed English, you know. So he told me what he was doing. He was working with a guy called Denny Lane, who was in the original Moody Blues. And he played me A Whiter Shade of Pale, which I nearly fainted when I heard it. We went into a little room. So I said, what are you doing in town? He says, I've got a Georgie Fame session at A&R Studios. A&R Studio was a studio, I think, on 48th Street, Manhattan, and the R is Ramone, Phil Ramone. Who's the A? You know, you would know, Dick, who that is the A.
We could Google it, but why waste time? A&R Studios, very important place for music to be made in New York. And then there were some satellite studios, including the little one in Rockland County, where Bruce Springsteen made his first records and so on. So they were going to use that for Georgie Fame.
Yeah, so Denny hired a guy called, I think, Arthur Baker, who was a bass player, A&R guy at the time, to help him work with New York musicians. And we had some illustrious, I forget the drummer's name, but he was a famous jazz drummer. And I went, I can't believe it, I've got that guy's LP records, you know, and he's playing rock and roll, which I thought was, how do you do
Connie
that?
Kay used to pick up a lot of that work from the Modern Jazz Quartet.
Oh, yeah.
You never know. Atlantic, you know, never know. He was on the Van Morrison records in the very beginning.
Well, anyway, what did I do? Oh, yeah, Denny, I said, he played the record, he played the demo to me back at the Richmond organization. I said, how do you guys do it in England? How do you record? He said, well, I booked the studio for a day, we play the demo, and then we start rolling some spliffs. And I don't know, in those days, the British spliff was about that long. They were about like 16 papers, you know, and sometimes they'd roll it in a newspaper, but that's another subject. And so he said, we roll a spliff, and then we fool around a bit, and maybe by the end of the day, we've got a master of one song. He's talking about an 8-hour session. I said, New York. I said, Denny, this is New York. We've got Local 802. You've got 3-hour sessions, period. You know, you go 1 minute over those 3 hours, and you're penalized. You know, you'll have to pay another $500, something like that. So he got very worried, and I said, I'll make sure the session goes rapidly. I wrote down the chords. I wrote down where the drum fills were going to be, and I didn't write the music for it. I just wrote fill, drum fill, you know, and everyone was going to stop and they'd be like, barakatakatakata, you know, it's really, and then the chords and a couple of bass notes here and there and all that. And we had a mimeograph in those days. The first copier was a mimeograph. And you roll it out and all that. And we rolled out.
You could even, you know, bag the spliff and just inhale the mimeograph sheets and make your own Sgt. Pepper out of that.
That's true. That's true. I didn't know you did stand up.
You know, it's a sense memory.
But anyway, we ran down, put it in front of all these players, and they started going, ding, 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 ding. They listened to it and then started to play. And it was over in 15 minutes. We had a master recording of it. And Denny looked at me like, holy S.
This kid kept it moving.
Yeah. And you know, he was prepared to spend all day there, and I told him how much it would cost him, and that's when he got really worried, and that's why I did this. So 2 weeks later, he took my phone number, Oh, he said, first of all, he goes, I want to get an American to come over and work with me, an American record producer. And he already recognized me as a record producer working for the company, just in-house. He says, I'm going to go out to LA and see if Phil Spector will be my assistant. I said, good luck. So I kind of knew I bagged the job, you know?
That's amazing. So you go over there and you're under his wing, and under my thumb. Let's go to Olympic.
Yeah, I can't dance. So yeah, so I'm under his wing for about a full year. I assisted him on all these recording sessions. Procol Harum, I did a lot of mixing work on the second album. My Whiter Shade of Pale was already in the can. It was released and all that. And I did a few, he started being a little selfish. He started producing 3 people at the same time. And this is why he wanted me. So he would leave me with Procol Harum while he went off to go with Georgie Fame or someone else.
Amazing.
And I remember the worst time was he was producing Manfred Mann, and a song called So Long Dad, and he brought me along and introduced me to the band, and he said, I'll be back in a few hours. They resented the hell out of me. You know, they didn't want to be treated like that, and I felt like if I don't rise to the occasion, something very bad is going to happen. It took me about 20 minutes, and they finally got some confidence in me. I knew what I was doing, but I was a total unknown. I had a real thick American accent, worse than I do now. And and they just saw me as this belligerent Yank or something. They didn't call me a Yank as well, you know.
And how old are you exactly at this point? Like 20?
At this time, I'm 23 years.
23.
Yeah.
So, well, you know, George Harrison is 23, Mick Jagger is 21 at this time.
Yeah, George is 2 months older than me. Yeah, so we're
amazing.
about the same age, yeah.
Now you start to have these encounters at this point, and it's all happenstance.
Yeah, well, I went into Olympic Studios in a suburban neighborhood called Barnes in England, and that's what Denny loved that room. He recorded Procol Harum in there and a group called The Move, and he had his favorites that he worked there. But in the other studio was a big scoring a room where they records film scores, and there was a projector and a screen and all that. The Rolling Stones would take out that room just for themselves and their entourage. So we have this small, tight little studio here, and you just walk next door, and there's Brian Jones, and when he was alive, and the Stones, and their American producer, I forget what his name was, and he's running around in circles. It was like a race course there. People are just running around and playing music. Total chaos.
Total chaos. Andrew Lou Oldham.
But then, this is the cool thing. We went back to our room, and Brian Jones comes in, and he was immaculately dressed in Edwardian clothes. He had ruffles coming down, spilling down to his knuckles like that, and rings on his fingers. And he said, Denny, I sent my chauffeur out today to buy A Whiter Shade of Pale. I really love this record, you know. I go, holy shit, he's got a chauffeur to buy the record, you know. And he's wearing ruffles, and he's a puff, you know. And he's in the Rolling Stones, you know. Anyway, it was just unbelievable. It was just unbelievable, too. That was like my first day in the studio with Denny. And the second day was almost like that, too. You know, people were walking in and out. I saw Hendrix in this very same studio. I met him. I saw him a couple of weeks later at the Savile Theater, which used to be on Savile Road. It's no longer, it's been demolished since. But he got up there and he did Hey Joe, and he burnt his, he put lighter fluid on his guitar and he threw a match on it. And I'm sitting in the audience. I said, don't do that. Give that Stratocaster to me. I didn't see the theatrical side of it. I just saw this beautiful. Oh, and I saw Pete Townsend did the same thing about a month or two later. He took his guitar and he cracked it on the floor, and I went, I want that guitar. I mean, could it be glued back together again?
I guess we don't have to say it out loud, but we probably should, that because you're all in your 20s at this point, and what Tony was saying earlier about how this new radio and this new records and this new, you know, world of music for youth was really unique. You know, in the big band era, you know, kids would do the jitterbug and swing music. Maybe
Yeah.
Benny Goodman was the first
Yeah.
artist to ever really just be oriented to, you know, that. But you're a community of people who are of a generation. You put your instruments through electricity. You even break them. You yell and scream and imitate R&B records from America and did everything the grown-ups hate, you know.
Yeah.
So you're a little coterie of people. This is not Pete Townsend, whose show is coming to Broadway again. This is not what
No.
the Stones and the Beatles and all the others would become these vaunted figures of the 20th century. We know that they're going to be taught hundreds of years from now. But you were just young people who encountered each other. You were a community, and I guess you were kind of casual with each other.
Yeah, and we were all from neighborhoods. You know, Pete Townsend, they all knew each other from at least teens. And they would form bands early on, and they would be in groups with their mates. You know, no one would come in through an agency or anything like that. So it was very organic in that sense, that each band was actually a little tribe, and they had their tribal ethics. You know, this was a wonderful thing I recognized early. And me, as a stranger, I would have to come in and obey their rules. I would realize, how do I fit in with these guys? First of all, I had to learn, my vocabulary had to change a bit, because the British use very different words for the same things that we have in the
Tubes or valves.
Yeah, and it wasn't so much I didn't adapt an accent, but I would have to use the jargon, you know, whatever the jargon was, and even in the studio jargon.
Were you a little exotic to them, being an American kid?
That helped me, in some cases it did, because they loved American music, and they did want to hear stories from me and what music I grew up with and things like that. So it was a fair trade, but most of the time I was accepted. Sometimes I was flatly rejected for being an American.
So at this point, it's the mid-'60s, and obviously The Who and the Rolling Stones and Jimi Hendrix are known quantities. They're the leaders of, admittedly, this subdivision of the larger music world, because it was Shirley Bassey and Matt Monroe's party, and then there was still these sessions to make these records for these kids. But the Beatles would change that in a big way. That reset the premise of everything. But what I'm bringing us to now is the point at which you, in an organic and happenstance way, encounter this David Jones fellow who would become David Bowie, and Mark Bolan. And they're just what, this is such a potentially pejorative term, but I'll use it anyway. In today's parlance, they were hipsters.
Yeah. Well, the two very close stories. I met David Bowie and Mark Bolan in the same month. So I had arrived in London in April of '67, and by that autumn, I was told to go out and find a group of my own, artists to produce on my own as a talent scout. Before I met Mark Bolan, Denny's partner, a guy called David Platts, who is the publisher of, the head of the CEO of the publishing side of it, he said, I want you to come to my office. I'd like to play something to you. I said, okay. So I go in, and he puts the needle down on a DRAM album. It was The World of David Bowie, it was called. And this is a record he made with, I think, a guy called Mike Leander. I'm not sure who the producer was, but it was a very Broadway-driven album.
Mike Leander was the guy that that went on George Martin's S list because he wasn't available to score something for the Beatles, and they used him for, I think, She's Leaving Home on Sgt. Pepper. He was known for that sentimental kind of sound.
Yeah, but he was a great arranger and one of the go-to arrangers at the time. And so I listened to it, and I just heard, this was the record with the Laughing Gnome on it.
Yes.
I don't know if you've heard the Laughing Gnome, but it's a goofy record about it. And then David does the gnome's voice at half speed, and they speed it up, so it's like that, you know, like Alvin and the Chipmunks style song. So I said, the guy's got a great voice, and he can write great. I said, but he's all over the place. He doesn't know what he wants. And David Platt said, precisely. He doesn't know what he wants. He goes, would you like to meet him? I go, sure, why not? He goes, he's in the next room. So it was all a setup for me to meet Bowie. And we were about the same age. So open the door, and he's sitting on this couch in this other room, and he's got this big grin on his face because he knew he was in on it, that he was going to meet me. And the first thing I do is you look into a person's eyes, and I'm saying,
Two colors.
which one? Honestly, I said, and I'm looking from eye to eye, and I go, I've never seen this before. I think Mike Stoller, Lieber and Stoller, one of them had two different colored eyes. It's the only other time I've seen that.
Well, David's issue with the eyes, he literally, if you don't know, one was blue and one was
Pale blue.
pale, but it was an injury that caused that, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, he had a fight with his schoolmate, George Underwood, who they were going after the same girl, and George made a date with the girl to meet in the town square, and he told David, I'm going to meet her in the town square at 8 o'clock. So David gets there at 7:30, and he says to the girl, he says, George isn't coming. When George found out, the next day on the school bus, George just socked him in the eye and paralyzed his retina, pupil. What's the thing that opens and closes? Iris.
Yes.
Yeah, the iris, yeah.
Many years later, and we will get to this story because it's one of your great ones, in David Bowie's first encounter with John Lennon, the two men are kind of circling each other like alley cats that might break into a fight at any moment, and they're so, in awe in a way that words fail them. I don't want to spoil it, but I'm just teasing, still to come in the Tony trajectory, but by that time, David is David. And he has already started inventing a new persona every time he'd do a record or a tour. But bring us back to this early David, just a slappy, goofy kid trying to figure stuff out?
Yeah, he did. He wanted to make, I told him, I said, you have to make records for people your own age or go into music theater, but you have to make up your mind. What he did was, he said, yeah, I want to make pop records. I want to be famous. I want to make pop records. And I said, well, that's okay. I said, you've got the voice for it. It's just using your voice in a different way.
And why is he thinking Anthony Newley? You probably weren't.
No, I liked it because in the States, we already had What Kind of Fool Am I? It was a big hit in America before I went there. So we knew who Anthony Newley was. But I never expected like a 21-year-old guy who wanted to be that. And he had a manager called Ken Pitt, who they were, it's common knowledge, they were lovers as well, and Ken Pitt was the Broadway guy. He wanted David to be in theater, musical theater. And David would go with someone who, he realized that he couldn't do it alone. So if Ken Pitt was the only game in town, then he's gonna go with whatever Ken Pitt said he was gonna go with. So when I met David and told him all about, yeah, we're gonna make some rock and roll records and all that, and he went back to tell Ken Pitt. Ken Pitt said, Tony Visconti is a red pinko communist. That's what he is.
Them's fighting words.
Yeah. You don't want to make a record with that guy. You don't want to make records with it because he knew what was going to happen. So within about a month or two, they left. They parted company, and we started making some, for the DRAM label, we made some rock and roll.
And David would take this theatricality to a place that no one could imagine. So
he didn't have to give it up. He just got better at it.
He just got better. He got original at it. I mean, if he had stayed with what was envisioned for him, it would have just gone in this corny direction that would have petered out. But his originality, and I guess that came from the rock and roll. But you two bonded as rock and roll buddies. You were bump-a-dump-a-dump-bump, from day one.
Yeah, we both like, and we were both, what do you call that, we both like other music too. We could sit down and listen to a Mahler symphony together as well. He was well into classical music, and I was into Elizabethan music. It was one of the reasons why I wanted to go to England. I was going to try to catch the last wave of Elizabethan music, but I was off by 3 centuries.
Until all of a sudden, at Olympic Studio, you find Brian Jones noodling on a harpsichord, and here they are inventing
Nicky Hopkins was on that.
Baroque pop on the spot. Whiter Shade of Pale based on Bach. Hamburg. Did you make Hamburg for Procol Harum?
I was on that album.
That was that
assistant.
album,
Yeah.
So they're borrowing from classical music and infusing it in rock at the same time that we're borrowing Bo Diddley riffs and all that. So what an interesting big bang that was.
And also because of George Martin and the Beatles, now people wanted classical instruments and arrangements on their records. So Yesterday is the classic example of that. When that came out, everyone said, that was just pop music was here, and Yesterday was here, and it was still considered a pop record, played on, AM radio as well and all that. So that's when my other training came in. I was in high school, I was a music major. So by the time I was in my senior year, I was writing scores for entire orchestras, 50-piece orchestra, which was my own little band in high school. And so I went across the water with a good education of how, and of course George Martin was my idol. So I said I could do that. That's what I do. I'm rock and roll and I'm classical. Like Paul had to learn rock and roll from the Beatles, but that's what I do. That's who I am. So until this day, that's the kind of record producer, arranger that I am.
Tony Visconti, an amazing life in music, and we're gonna do something fun right now. I would like to play Name That Tony tune, but I would like you to name that tune in one note or less, just to show how baked into our consciousness these things are. So we're gonna try an experiment. I think our AV team is ready, so let's let one rip, one note at a time. You see that? Was I right?
Young Americans?
That was Young Americans. That was 1/2 second of Young Americans.
Okay.
To get a sound that distinctive, everything that we've been talking about, just like that Sunday gravy that Mrs. Visconti made for 4 days, has got to be baked in. Bring us to Mark Bolan's house now. We connected with David. He's young. He's figuring stuff out. He's a little bit Broadway. He's a little bit rock and roll.
Just before we go there, can I
Yes.
just acknowledge that Carlos Alomar is in the audience? And part of that soundbite you just heard was him. Like, something.
Wow.
So let's get on to Mark
So
Bolan.
we're going to put,
You'll
we're
be
gonna
up
put
later,
two
right?
autographs on my record album here today. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, so Mark Bolan.
Yes. Mark is a guy that you have also a kind of a casual encounter with, and he is different than David. He's a fellow of shorter stature.
Yeah.
And he's a true space, that they called him the angel-headed hipster or whatever. He was a different kind of guy that seemed like he really came from another planet. I think maybe David invented being the star man, but was Mark the original star man?
Yeah, Mark was a very unusual person, and I loved him to bits when he was alive. He came from a tough East End family who were in the garment trade, and he was half Jewish, and his parents were in the garment trade and all that. And he had an older brother, Harry, who would play, like David had an older brother, Terry. They would play all these rock and roll records to their younger siblings, you know. And Mark grew up wanting to be Eddie Cochran. That he loved Eddie Cochran records. And there's a classic photo of him with a guitar that's this big, because Mark was very small. It was a normal sized guitar, and he's doing an Eddie Cochran, good imitation of it, just in this still photo. Oh, I took that in my apartment, though. That's
Amazing.
Tyrannosaurus Rex. And he's playing my classical guitar with a guitar pick, which is a no-no. But anyway, he was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. He modeled before he was a musician. When he used to comb his hair very slick back, and he was one of the, when you're a mod or a rocker, he was a mod, as Bowie was too. Bowie was a mod. And Mark did a lot of catalog work as a model. Then, I don't know where he picked the guitar up, but when he came to me, he was a J.R.R. Tolkien fan of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and he took all that imagery and made it his own, and without even stealing one single word, you felt like you were reading another chapter of The Hobbits when he wrote a song. It was all about fairies and gnomes, and he invented this word dwarns. Dwarns were like this big machine-like mammoth. I don't know, he explains it on one of his records or one interview what each character is. And the music was absolute top-class poetry. I've got a friend who said, in the sense of poetry, Mark Bowie was the better lyricist between him and David Bowie.
I was just going to say, David is quite the wordsmith, and he has a very direct way of telling a story and advancing a storyline in a song. You know, we're almost at Space Oddity, folks. We're getting there. But think about Bolan with his, you know, beard full of stars, and all of the other, you know, beat poetry things that are baked into the Electric Warrior songs. It just, he was in touch with this whole other.
But believe it or not, when we did the Tyrannosaurus Rex albums, the first one, first two, he in his head, he was making a rock and roll album. We didn't have kick drum, drum kit or anything like that, not even a bass. I think he allowed me to play bass on the third album. But he swore he was making rock and roll songs, and in later years, he did re-record a few of them with his band T-Rex. So he was naive in a way, but his naivety bred this wonderful kind of folk music that was a bit like the Incredible String Band, who was very popular at the time. They were the only other game in town. There was Tyrannosaurus Rex and the Incredible String Band. So he didn't have much competition. And because of John Peel was his champion, John Peel would have him on the show live quite often.
The great London tastemaker of DJs.
Yeah, definitely. He was a great guy. He would have Tyrannosaurus Rex on at least once a month, and I would sometimes go up to the studio and help them get the sound balance, you know. Like, the BBC had, like, 2 microphones. That was it. And I got the sound balance. But in those days, they weren't rich.
Were David and Mark part of your friendship pod at the time together? So you all had a little scene going.
They knew each other before they met me. And then David was the first person I met through David Platts. And I had an apartment in Lexham Gardens in Earl's Court. I just got an email today from a woman who moved into that apartment.
Oh, no.
And said, is it true that you lived there and you had David Bowie and Mark Bolan doing jam sessions there? Wow. So I haven't written back to her yet, but I'm getting goosebumps that we're talking about this now. So David came around first, and he used it also, he lived very far away in Beckenham, and at, say, 11 o'clock, the trains would stop. So if he picked up a girl in a nightclub, he'd say, is it okay if we spend the night, Tony? And I go, all right. Who's going to wash the sheets? You know, there was a kind of relationship we had. We were like brothers, you know, we were lads. We didn't say brothers, he called them lads. We were lads. Then Mark Bolan came along. I found him second in the UFO club and found out that they knew each other. So then Mark Bolan started coming around on nights that sometimes David was there, sometimes he wasn't. But I've got a lot of photos from back in the day, and how I wish I had enough tape, because I had a reel-to-reel, but only one reel of tape, and I used to go over the tape and wipe it if something else better was happening, you know. So there might somewhere that tape exists, or maybe my mother gave it to the nuns. Some nun somewhere is, you know, put out a bootleg.
The nun sessions. That's one Bowie persona that he never got to. But now we're going to, as our friends from New Zealand put it so wittily, the Bowie's in space. Who are those guys again? The Flight of the Conchords.
Yeah.
So Bowie's almost in space. You've made some recordings with him for what will become the first David Bowie album, but there's a bone of contention with Space Oddity. Tell us about that.
Yes, I had already been working with him with the DRAM records, and he's writing these wonderful songs like Janine, and like he's a real poet like Dylan. He's like a Dylan poet. And with a very romantic side to these songs. They're like really beautiful songs. And he comes up one day, he just is on a whim, and I was living with him at the time in Beckenham. He writes this song, Space Oddity. And he plays it to me, and it was absolutely nothing like the other songs. It's a sudden departure, and it came literally from nowhere, because he had never written anything like it before, and neither of us had heard anything like that on the radio. It was a complete, unique piece of music, a brand new piece of music, and a genre he was starting, which would eventually, you know, turn into Ziggy Stardust and all that. And I said to him, I'm not gonna produce that. I said, that's not you. And boy, how fucking wrong I was. But anyway, I said, this guy, Gus Dudgeon down the hallway, who produced a lot of Elton John albums, he loved David. He did the DRAM album with him back at Decca Studios in London. He says, "You're crazy." He goes, "That's a hit song." I go, "I don't care." I was that red pinko commie. I said, "I don't care. It's just a shot at stardom, which is just a shabby, pathetic shot."
So when
Cheap
David
shot.
wrote the song, was the song inspired by what was going on in July of 1969, or was the decision to make the record connected to the whole moon landing, or what was the order of the trajectory there?
No, absolutely. And I said, I said to him, it's a cheap shot. You're taking advantage of the moon landing, of the astronaut, Buzz Aldrin, or whoever it was, like in the tin can and all that. And I said, it'll probably be a hit. But I had these scruples, and it was a hit. And it was a big hit. It wasn't the first time around. I think it was released 3 times.
Yes.
It flopped the first two times around.
Rick Wakeman is in there, right?
He's doing the Mellotron, and I've remixed it so many times since for different, Bowie always said the original person who produced it should do the remixes. He anticipated remixes in the future. If not, give it to Tony. So I get a lot of these remixes now I'm doing on my own. So anyway, when I did that, I listened to this 8-track, and it was so beautiful. It was so well recorded by Gus Dudgeon, and Rick. The Mellotron was recorded like with a microphone. You could hear people walking around in the room and talking. It was really a charming recording.
There's a really stark space oddity that comes deep into your sort of Berlin trilogy time, about 79 or so, and it always reminded me of John Lennon's Mother.
Yes.
And so did you make that
Yeah,
one?
we did that on purpose to sound like that, to sound like it was Mother. He did Mother as well. Bowie recorded Mother. Have you ever heard it? The Bowie version?
What is it on?
It was he did a Rugrats film called the song, yeah, I know.
It's work.
It is, and we did the song called Safe in the Skyline, which made it onto Heathen. And on that same session, we did Mother as well, and it was a B-side to some single. And it sounded absolutely great.
Wow. So this brings us like from 69 to 70. With Bowie, we're going to jump to about 73, 74, because there's a pause there. And David is doing very important work, but he's working with other people. But this also is your hot time for really doing things with T-Rex. Just to sort of go back to the other side of the Atlantic, letters home to Mom, you're still keeping in touch with the family, you haven't forgotten Bay Ridge, you're still dreaming of Sunday Gravy, and if you're able to just take a look at the thumbnails of photos, I think we have the photo of your mom serving T-Rex Sunday sauce in your Bay Ridge kitchen after they've established this relationship. I can't imagine a family gathering any cooler than that.
And I'm not in the picture because I'm behind the camera. But that's my girlfriend, Liz Hartley, over there. We all lived in the same house. And there's Bill Legend and Mickey Finn, Josephine Visconti, the famous alto.
And I love the white enameled baking pan.
Yeah.
That's how you get that stuff to come out good.
Those aren't meatballs. She made faux meatballs somehow. I forget what she used to make it, but Mark was a vegetarian.
Oh.
And we couldn't have any meat at the table for him.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Oh, what a meat. I could, yum, 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 I could taste it there.
So they've already made, I'm gonna guess you've already made Electric Warrior.
Yeah.
And you've already connected in...
No, we didn't. We started Electric Warrior in London. We had we had Jeepster, we recorded in London. The Motivator was recorded in London. Then he flew to America for a tour. So we had 3 in the can. We didn't even know it was called Electric Warrior yet. So this is he first hit New York before he went to LA. But this is in New York. He hits New York, and he has to come over to Mama Visconti's house for dinner. So then we went to a New York studio and recorded a few other songs in a New York studio. I think it was Media Sound. And so we have 3 more in the can now. And then because he was on tour, he had to fly to LA and do a few shows where we met Flo and Eddie, who's Howard Kalin and
Yes.
I know.
Howard and Mark Volman.
Mark Volman,
And they
yeah.
are the backup harmonies.
And they lined up Wally Hyder's studio there for us. They gave us the studio, and we recorded, that's where we recorded Get It On, Bang A Gong.
I see. Another one that is identifiable by only one note. Let's hear a piece of it. That's enough.
Yeah.
That would come on the radio when I was a kid, and that was as much time as I needed to reach for that volume and turn it as loud as it would go.
Yeah. And you know something? We had a record, for a follow-up, we had a record called Hot Love, which didn't make it big in America, but it went up to #1 immediately because on the heels of Get It On. And it was on British radio for it was #1 for 7 weeks. So we went to America, we recorded these songs, we went to LA and recorded songs with Flo and Eddie, and we go back to London, it's still #1 after being in America for like 4 or 5 weeks, you know. That was the biggest gift ever.
Electric Warrior is famous for the rock and roll numbers, and it's this boogie, as Ringo and John used to go, boogie, baby.
Boogie.
It's that, they just love that. But I'm so taken by the Baroque aspect of the arrangement. There are beautiful, the writing for Life's a Gas and Mambo Sun, and this is your hand now.
Yeah, I had, you know, George Martin was my teacher, and my object was, you know, I'm a competitive person. I wanted to get better than him. I just was going for it, you know, and I'm so proud of some of it. There's one arrangement, I don't know if we have it here, but called Whatever Happened to the Teenage Dream. And that I'm going for a kind of famous jazz arranger. I forget who I was channeling for that one, but it's jazzy, classical string writing, that one. So, I mean, I just wanted to get better and better at it. And I never got a degree in it, but I worked in the field. You know, I learned on the job.
Well, think about the Baroque pop aspects of Cosmic Dancer, let's say, and other things on this album. This is 1971. Your ability to write for a large-scale orchestra is very, you know, a very significant skill set. And there is a way that you connect with an album that is lauded as quite possibly the best solo record by a member of the Beatles, Paul McCartney's Band on the Run. And this is at a time when you have gone from a professional to a personal relationship with an artist that he championed in the early days of Apple Records, Mary Hopkins. She's now your wife. And you find yourself, after Paul returns from recording sessions in Africa, of all places, in 1973, being contacted to write embellishment for these tracks that Paul has just re-released without your embellishments as the undermixed version of Band on the Run. But your orchestral burst in the title song and the writing that you did for Picasso's Last Words and so on are one of your maybe underappreciated achievements as a guy who just wrote a score. So tell us about all of that.
I'll tell you why I was underappreciated. When the record came out, he left my name off the credits.
But it was restored at a certain point.
It was restored 25 years later when I
25
told him directly. I said, "Why did you leave my name off the credits?" So he says, he wrote back to me. He says, "You've got the credit now." And when the 25th anniversary came out, I finally saw my name on it. So anyway, that was a great adventure. I was sitting at home with Mary and our little child. Our little child was called Delaney then. He hated that name, so he's now called Morgan. But Delaney was about 2 years old.
There wasn't another kid called Bonnie.
No.
Okay.
So anyway, phone rings. Paul got my number, and he said, "Tony," I can't do the accent. Tony? He said, "Yeah." He goes, "It's Paul McCartney." I went, "Holy shit," you know. And I said, "Yeah, it's me." He goes, "Listen, you know the T-Rex records you produce?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "There's strings on them and all kinds of." He says, "Did you write the strings?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And there's silence. He goes, "Can you read and write music?" Because he could write, you know, he could whistle a song and somebody could transcribe it. And I said, "No, I can read and write music." He goes, "Okay," because I'm making this solo record. with my band Wings, you know, and I want to see if you'd like to do the arrangements for it. And I'm gonna faint, you know. I'm really gonna faint because
This crank call turned out to be real.
It was real. It wasn't a crank. And I love the Beatles. You know, I mean, if it wasn't for the Beatles, I wouldn't even dream. None of us would dream of going to London, really. Because they made it a very attractive place all of a sudden. You know, before that, you had these Terry Thomas films and Tommy Steele. Who wanted to go to a Tommy Steele concert? You know.
When the Beatles made their February 1964 appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show, there's a photo of the marquee, and in gigantic letters, it's Tessie O'Shea.
Yeah.
And, you know, Milton Berle or whomever, the Beatles and somebody else.
Yeah.
Tessie O'Shea was a great British vaudevillian performer.
Yeah, I saw Tessie now. She was one of the last red hot mamas, you know, which Sophie Tucker, of course, was the greatest. You know.
So anyway, when you go to make Band on the Run?
So Band on the Run, so I go to, he says, come to my house this Tuesday or something like that. It was a Sunday phone call, I remember. Or was it a Tuesday phone call? I don't know. But anyway, I go to his house 2 days later, manuscript paper, pencils, sharpened, everything ready. I ask him if he has a guitar there because I could, you know, figure out notes on the guitar. And he's sitting at his piano, and he's got one of those early Philips tape recorder cassette players. And he has another recorder where he's got the music they recorded in Ghana, and he plays the opening of Band on the Run, and he goes, "This is where I want you to write a bit." And then he stops it, and he records that over to the cassette he's making for me, and that bit was da 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 da. And I said, "Well, what comes before that bit?" He goes, I don't want to play it to you." And I go, "Why?" He goes, "I'm afraid of bootlegs." See, he wouldn't give me the rough mixes of the album because he was afraid I'm going to bootleg it, you know.
But he let you listen to it once.
Yeah, he said, and he recorded that da 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 da. So I said, "Well, I have to know how many bars before. You know, what is it, 17 bars, 18 bars, then da 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 comes in, because that's the way you normally write an arrangement." He goes, no, just write those notes. I'll tell you when they come in. You know, you'll know when they come in." And that's the way we did it. And it was the same thing with Mrs. Vanderbilt, same thing with every song on the album. He would only play the snippet where he wanted the strings.
Wow.
And I'd have these unknown amount of bars before the musicians come in. And I did hear the full versions at his house, but I forgot, you know. I went home with these little bits, you know. I forgot what all the full versions.
You get one last little blast at the very end of the album because he chooses to sort of do like leitmotif. He has bits of the other songs work back in.
Yeah.
So it ends with Band on the Run and fades. Was that his idea, yours?
That was so much fun. Yeah, I remember we had to record all these bits. It's almost like putting a motion picture together, the way he approached it. And it turned out absolutely great. I was very pleased on the sessions. One day when we were doing this, we did this over the space of a few days. I brought Mary. He wanted to see Mary, but we had the kid. Well, actually, Linda wanted to see Mary. She was like, "I just sit in the studio all by myself. I want to see Mary."
Mary Hopkin had a hit with a song that Paul wrote called Goodbye.
Yeah, and he produced Those Were the Days.
Those Were the Days,
so
put it on the map.
Russian folk song. So I bring Mary, and of course we brought our kid with us. And there's the beauty. I love her. A little Welsh lass from the valleys. Anyway, so then Linda brought Paul's little son James. So the kids, of course, are playing. They're running around. They're crawling under the seats and all that. And then Paul said, "Tony," he says, "when you come back tomorrow, don't bring Mary with you." And I said, "All right," you know. So he goes, "The kids are out of control." But it was Linda, you know, who wanted this, and she was I came back the next day, and it was Linda sitting all on her own, hardly doing anything. So So then he says at the end of it, he says he's going to go and mix it, and I went down to the mixes just to say with the levels. You know, he wanted me to check the levels and all that. I said, "Yeah, this sounds good." And I think Jeff Emmerich's the mixer of it. If not, some other guy. But you know, he asked me as a consultant to go down there. Then about 2 weeks later, he phones up and he goes, I'd like to play the final mixes to you." And I say, "Oh, okay, great." So I said, Mary is going to cook some Italian food. She got these recipes from my mom. So she cooks a big dinner for Paul and Linda. And I think Morgan, no, he was too little. Somebody else came. So we had this dinner, and he walks in the door, and he's waving the tape. And I said, oh, man, I can't wait to hear my arrangements. And he says, I can't wait to hear my arrangements. So that's why my name isn't on the first time around. He had a little bit of an attitude about that, you know. But, you know, 25 years later, he says, you got your credits and all that. And the last time I saw him, we were in great speaking terms.
That's wonderful. And this was such an important detour for you, even though you didn't get to participate in the Bowie chronology, if I have this right, Hunky Dory, Ziggy Stardust, and then Aladdin Sane come and go without your involvement, but then you pick it up with a live record, and now we're going to move into Young Americans. I think then comes Station to Station,
yeah,
which you were not involved with, but then comes the Berlin Trilogy, and we could actually call it a quad because we want to also loop Scary Monsters into that. There's another pause. It's the Nile Rodgers period. Then we pick up Bowie again much later in his career. So this is quite an on-again, off-again for different reasons. But the on-again, the very happy on-again part is where we rejoin your reconnection with David after you've established this incredible chops, writing arrangements, working with T-Rex, doing these other projects. So
the first time after we were working for a period of time, and the first time he used another producer, I was extremely hurt. I couldn't believe it. I said, what did I do wrong? Then, out of the blue, for the next album, like Young Americans, he phones me up, come on down, can you make it to Philadelphia tomorrow? And by the way, I said, if you fly me on the Concorde, I'll do that. He did. So here I am back in the team. I meet this young man who walks in with his guitar amp.
Carlos Alomar.
Carlos Alomar, with his wonderful wife, Robin. And he's got this friend, this tall guy, Luther Vandross. And these three walk into the studio like champions from the Bronx. So I was so happy to meet them. And so I'm back on form with them. You know, we do this album, which we had a massive hit with Young America, the single. The album was great. The tour was fantastic. And then he uses another producer again. And I'm going, I'm not so hurt this time because I see the wisdom of it. We, I guess, in the back of our minds, knew we were always going to be at least friends, because we got on great, and we're going to work together from time to time. But he goes out and he learns stuff from other producers, and I go out and I learn other stuff from other artists. You know, we pick up information and knowledge and skills by working with other people. That's actually better than, like, say, a marriage that's, I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, a 40-year-old marriage, and they stuck with the same person for 40 years. We had a loose relationship. We were loose. And,
the Young Americans period is the one that engenders the harmonic convergence of David Bowie and John Lennon. We know on the album that there is a cover version of Across the Universe, and there's also the co-written song Fame.
Yeah.
So what can you tell us about those?
well, damn it. That was another weird situation where I finished an album called Young Americans, or it was temporarily called The Gouster. And Carlos and, you know, we were all on there. We had other tracks, and which only came to light many years later. And my job was, now the album's finished, I had a great studio in London. I was going to go back to my studio and mix it in my London studio, send him the mixes. Of course, there were no MP3s then, but we used to do it by DHL. So I'd make a spool of tape, you know, with the mixes and put it in a DHL. He'd get it in 24 hours and listen to it. During that period, he meets John Lennon, which we met, actually. We met John Lennon together on the same night. We went up to somebody's apartment. Oh, his hotel room.
Lennon
Hotel
in the
Pierre.
St. Regis.
Yeah, the Hotel Pierre. It was
the Pierre.
It was Bowie's room, Bowie's suite. And Lennon was there that night, and so was his girlfriend, May Pang, and so is Ava Cherry, I believe, and a few other friends, and then this cocaine dealer comes in, and she's a lovely Hispanic girl, and she brought us ever see Mount Kilimanjaro?
This is a time, and you know, we're not telling tales out of school, it's well documented. David was on this very unusual health regimen. It was the cocaine and milk diet.
That's right. He ate a vegetable. I think he ate beets now and then.
You got to get some red in there. Get some color in there, David.
Yeah, it was quite appalling. It was disgusting. But and then he's
So there's a mound of goods in the same.
Chain smoke, and he's drinking the milk, and the milk is going to kill. Well, actually, it was calories, you know. And he was so skinny.
Everybody was crazy about Gitans cigarettes.
You could see the
That's all they ever.
Gitan. Yeah.
Gitans, pardonnez-moi.
But you could see his pelvis, like it was almost.
Its bones were sticking out.
Yeah, and you know, no stomach whatsoever. It was just going in like that. Wow. And the cigarette, he would smoke. Started out at 40 a day. We ended up smoking 60 a day. I quite liked the cigarette. I was smoking about half as much as he was. But when one was going out, before one went out, he'd light the next one. So he was a chain smoker of Gitan, which cut out a lot of his high notes, which he used to have brilliant high notes in the early days. But it gave him this other voice, like he was a chameleon in experience. His voice actually went through changes because of this, you know, so-called bad behavior. But you know, he could sing low, he could sing high. He could sing in the middle.
So in the hotel room in the Pierre with John and David, there is this moment that I referred to earlier that takes a while for these guys to warm up to each other.
Not very long, because I was in London only 2 days, and he said I went into the studio with Carlos and the band, you know, and we recorded a song that John and I just threw together in the studio called Fame. And Carlos is part writer of that song, and I'm missing out all the fun in London, mixing songs that aren't going to get on the album. So I was hurt.
Your intersection with other members of the Beatles, we talked about obviously McCartney, a collaborator, Lennon, an associate in the warmth and feelings about John Lennon, George Harrison, you get to, and Ringo because of the connection with Mark Bolan and a movie project they do. But very quickly, just give us a sweet little story about George Harrison's love of anything on wheels.
Well, this Brooklyn kid eventually met all 4 Beatles, which if that was it, I would have been happy. But I worked with 2 of them really closely. And that was Ringo always said when he was in films, you know, he was in A Hard Day's Night, that he wanted to be a film director. And he would, true to form, he became a film director. He's made, you know, he did The Magic Christian as well. So he decided to do a documentary on Mark Bolan, because Mark Bolan was a phenomenon, and all the Beatles took notice, like specifically like McCartney asking me, he was listening to T-Rex and asking me if I wrote the string arrangements. The Beatles were finally usurped by someone else, you know, someone as clearly at the time, there's this thing called T-Rex mania, or something like T-Rex-tasy. They call it.
T-Rex.
It's called T-Rex-tasy, and there's a band now called T-Rex-tasy, friends of mine. But the Beatles said, well, if you can't beat them, join them, and that's what they did. You know, like Ringo joined them. He made this great film. If you haven't seen Born to Boogie, you got to treat yourself. I'm sure it's now, by now it's on YouTube. But it's very funny. It's got very funny bits. There was this actor who played the wizard Catweasel. I don't know if anyone has you've seen Catweasel. His name is Jeffrey Belden. Mark and I were Jeffrey Belden fans, and we got him in the film. And he used to wear this, he was like a Merlin, but goofed. None of his magic spells ever worked. Like if it turned someone into a frog, it would turn into a telephone instead, you know? They would turn into a telephone. But we adored this man, and he came to be on that film set, and Mark and I just couldn't stop hugging him and, you know, and asking him to speak like Catweasel.
And George Harrison took a shine to your bike.
Yeah, so George Harrison lived in Henley-on-Thames, and my wife and I lived in Wargrave-on-Thames, and the commonality is of course the Thames River, which they had regattas every year, and you know, boat races and gondolas and dongolas. You know, there is a dongola. There's a gondola and there's a dongola. The dongola you do with poles. But the gondola, you do with paddles.
Doesn't go in the back of your computer, I guess.
No. So anyway, she was in Sainsbury's, a grocery store, buying groceries in Henley-on-Thames, and George Harrison's buying groceries. You know, Beatles do shopping, they go buy groceries and all that. And so they have a little chat, and he says, how's Tony doing? She says, he's just got a new motorcycle. I just got a new BMW. And he says, oh, I got to see it, because he was a car freak, and obviously he wanted to see a motorcycle too. He probably had some motorcycles, or maybe afterwards he bought one. But anyway, he drove up to my driveway, which is all gravelly, all full of gravels. I lived in a beautiful 7-bedroom house. I think Carlos visited that house at one point. And I hear walking up to me. I'm trying to say, like, I'm looking in the book, should I change the air filter? What should I do? I wanted to do some maintenance on the bike, but BMWs are sealed. You know, you can't really do anything. And I look behind me, and that's George Harrison walking up behind me. And, you know, you get a little jolt when you meet a Beatle. You, huh, okay, hello, George. So what have you got? You know, I got a new motorcycle. Oh, can I see it? And he gets down, so he gets down there, he looks at the book, and he wants to hear me rev the motor and all that. I didn't take him for a ride. Imagine if I killed a Beatle. I wouldn't be sitting here today. But anyway, it was nice. I met them all under different circumstances.
We clearly went into too much detail with the recipes earlier because we are running low on time, but have a lot of amazing moments to cram into a very short space. So I'm going to ask you for just a few specific things, and I'll give a little background.
Okay, I'll be quick.
The Bowie story has now moved. The venue has changed. You're in Berlin. A shy Midwesterner named Jimmy Osterberg has joined the party as Iggy Pop. And you're creating what is now considered to be a body of work, a trilogy which has inspired classical musicians like Philip Glass. It's attracted the likes of Robert Fripp and Brian Eno, and you're making these arty albums in this kind of expatriate setting. And the song Heroes, which is one of the great improvised works in all of recording. And you've told me that David Bowie was a one-take guy, and all of this came together with live mixing and figuring out the effects on the fly. It's a magnificent recording. It's inspired by this couple huddling in the shadows of the sweeping light by the Berlin Wall, and at some point it inspires you and Iggy and David to try to go through Checkpoint Charlie, come hell or high water.
Well, that's going to be in the movie, but it wasn't quite like that, but it was similar to that. Yeah, he was stuck writing Heroes, writing the lyrics, and Coco, his assistant, was with him and, you know, keeping people out of the room. I think we even got rid of our engineer, Edward Meyer, just so David could sit there and listen to the music, and he's like, I've got a picture. I did walk in, and I've got a picture of him like leaning on his arm, and he's writing lyrics, and he asked me to take a walk and leave him. So our backing singer was, gosh, I kissed her and I forgot her name.
That happens in
Typical.
life.
We took a walk down by the wall, and we did snog by the wall, and he saw that, and it got in the lyrics, you know. And we came back. Coco said, you and her, she are in the song, you know, so big deal. But anyway, I want to say that what's lovely about Heroes is Carlos's riff on Heroes. Da 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 da. He's playing this riff through the whole thing, and other things, you know. He is such a major part of Heroes. I don't know if he gets enough credit, but I'm giving him enough credit right now.
Sure thing.
And not only Carlos, but his group that he was in, Damn, you know, Dennis Davis and Carlos Alomar and George Murray on bass. What a rhythm section. It's so hard to equal them. Anyway.
Many, many years later, and many David Bowies later, because he becomes the Thin White Duke, and then he says, let's dance, and embraces the MTV generation. And then finally, you come around to each other again, and there are a couple of records, and it's a kind of a comeback, but unbeknownst to you, it was also going to wind up being a long and rather sad goodbye. The last album, Black Star, you were intimately involved with. Before that was the album that you believed you were making with David while he was healthy, but I think he revealed to you at some point that he had issues. So tell us about those times.
I did the last his last four albums, you know, and that was, the next day was, I did Heathen,
Yeah.
Reality, and what was the third one called?
And then
The Next Day.
The next day.
The
So
Next
the
Day.
next day and Black Star
And then
are the
finally
last
Black
ones.
Star,
Right,
yeah.
right.
So I could see his health was really good up until Black Star. And before the album started, he called me into his office. He said, I just want to, he says, we should have a little chin wag before we start recording tomorrow. And this is the first time I heard the expression chin wag. It means conversation, by the way. And so I go up there, and his assistant, the lady who runs the office, meets me at the door, and she's very sad. She's got a very sad expression. And she says, David's waiting for you in that room. And I go in there, that room, and he's sitting on the other side of a table like this, small table, and with it kind of this close. And he's wearing a woolly hat, and coming down to about here. And then I noticed one thing that I've noticed on other people in this condition. He's got no eyebrows. I said, that means chemotherapy. And he broke, without breaking I had no idea he was ill. And he said, before we go in tomorrow, I don't want to scare you. And he says, I want you to let you know that I've got cancer, and I'm going for chemotherapy. And he pulls off his hat, which he did it just the way those transvestites in Berlin used to do. You know, Romy Haag, whatever her name was, she just rip it off like that, you know, the wig. But he did it like that, very dramatically, you know. And there he is, like he's like a ball is a billiard ball. And I cried my eyes out, and he comes running around the other side, and he's like hugging me and consoling me. And it's only just lately I can stop myself from crying to telling the story, but I can feel they're welling up a little bit. So the next day, we started with the Donny McCaslin band, and he went through the whole thing. He came in with the cap, the skull cap, tells them, guys, you got to know this. He says, we all signed NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. Goes, you mustn't tell anybody about this, but you might as well see the condition I'm in. And he whips the thing off and all that, and everyone going like, oh my God. You know, you could see the expression on their faces. So we did that album for about 5 to 6 months on and off. He had to take off 2 weeks every month to do more chemotherapy. And I got a little, like after the first 2 months, I said to myself, like, I can't start another project with other people. You know, and I've got to keep my mind on things. So we had this album called The Lodger, which we both hated the mixes. We never liked those mixes because he was an Elephant Man on Broadway. And I had to mix it in New York. And I forget who, the Hit Factory, they gave us the worst studio they had in New York. Well, it was the only one available. And I had to mix Lodger on this little, it was a very amateurish board and all that. So we released it, it was a hit, but we knew it was supposed to sound like Scary Monsters. It was supposed to sound like, you know, things flying around and great EQ and great drum sound. So finally, a few years ago, whilst he was doing that, I remixed Lodger in my own spare time. I didn't tell him. I waited until I did 5 mixes. And it was towards the end of Black Star. And I said, I've got a surprise for you. I played the first one, Fantastic Voyage. And immediately he heard from the drum fill, which you couldn't hear on the original. You couldn't hear Dennis Davis's drum fill. Now it goes like boom, 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 like that. This smile, he knew exactly what I had done. And he listened to, I said, at the first one, I said, you want to hear the second one, the third one? So he listened to all 5, and he said, I'm going to tell Bill, his manager, to give this project the green light. This has got to come out. So if you want to hear the way the Lodger was intended to sound, go for the 2017 version, because I finished it after he passed away.
Well, as the ageless Mick Jagger put it at age 25, baby, baby, we are out of time. And it has flown by so amazingly. There are other events, and oh my gosh.
Thank you.
This is a festival. with a variety of programs, and I think that we can't push it, you know, even another 5 or another 2 minutes over, but I just want to, as everybody's gathering their things, give you the last word, because there's so much life that you've experienced and so many privileges that you've enjoyed and people that you've connected with, and how would you sum it all up for us? Are you still that kid from Bay Ridge?
Well, I'm still the kid who said I want to make music my life. And I haven't changed. I haven't done any other job. I wouldn't even know how to do any other job. I'm only suited to do this. And I will turn 80 in 20 days. And I already have my next 2 albums lined up, so I'll be producing until the end of this year.
There is new Tony Visconti music. There is a box set, vinyl and CD, of some things that we might have certainly missed in this conversation, but you can catch up with his amazing work for Kaiser Chiefs, Boomtown Rats, The Alarm.
Altered Images, Claire Brogan.
Images, a record with Morrissey. That's a little on the downside. I hate to break it to you. And just an amazing life in music. Badfinger, Argent. Stop it already. Actually, he won't. He won't. And that's our joy. Tony Visconti, thank you for your time and your talent.
And listen, Auntie, best DJ in the world.